Next piece is Sarah Jaffe. She's a journalist and author of Necessary Trouble, Americans in Revolt. She writes, in the last week or so, I've had several conversations with people who've spent a lot of time and energy on the Sanders campaign wondering where to go next. It's a fair question. Presidential elections suck up all the air in the political space for the years that they take up, and as big donors spend more and more money on them, they expand to take up more and more time. But actually, I think the most important work is done outside the presidential arena. Sanders stepped into a space that had been created by tens of thousands of movement activists around the country, striking workers and occupiers and members of the movement for Black Lives, and articulated something that had been in the air. Capitalism is not working for most people. I think it's worth saying that any campaign you put your heart into that loses will leave you feeling the need to grieve. That's a human response. But after that, where do we go? The genie, as they say, isn't going back in the bottle. The anger and frustration, and most of all, hope for something better that people are feeling, the raised expectations are still here, and they need to go somewhere. That might be into local elections in cities and towns like the one where I live in New York's Hudson Valley, where the energy that Sanders tapped into can go into making real change on a community level, electing people who see outside the narrow choices that are on offer. But more importantly, at least in my opinion, that energy can go into existing movements or into creating a new political force within the community that demands better of the power structures that do exist. People who just began to think about the way power is wielded in the workplace can come together to support worker struggles, walk picket lines, adopt stores as groups did during the Verizon workers' strike. The demand for free college can go into organizing around student debt and for reinvestment in public higher education. As the Affordable Care Act continues to stumble and to be insufficient, Sanders' call for single-payer health care can be renewed on a state level, and in a national push for a public option, which is once again on the public mind as yet another private insurer pulls out of the ACA exchanges. Even as the Sanders campaign grew and won millions of votes, plenty of movement activists continued to do work that had nothing to do with the presidential race. Around the country, organizers with the movement of Black Lives worked on local issues, defeated prosecutors who gave carte blanche to police who kill, and also put together a platform, the Vision for Black Lives, that lays out demands for a truly free society, one in which not only state violence, but the economic violence of capitalism comes to an end. The Sanders campaign was something we should understand as another iteration of the social movements that have rocked the U.S. and the world in the last several years. It was not the beginning of the political revolution, and it will not be the end, as I said elsewhere. But like every other part of the struggle that has happened, it has brought in new people who are frustrated with the world as it is and ready to take some risks to make it better. Regardless of how they vote in November, what really matters is that they find ways to connect to the struggle and will continue no matter who is in the White House. I don't have a lot of disagreement with this particular writer, but I think she says something rather telling here, Sarah Jaffe does. She says, Sanders stepped into a space that had been created by tens of thousands of movement activists. And she's absolutely right. I said a moment ago that this was a top-down deal with Sanders. And I think it was. I think the space was there, but it wasn't designed for Bernie Sanders. It wasn't designed to exclude Bernie Sanders. I think all those movements that were occurring over the past 5 or 6 years, all those movements were looking for some way to coalesce around a central idea. And this is the part that I just said that I've seen fall to pieces. Sanders temporarily represented a central idea. And so it was Sanders who saw what was happening, and Sanders who said, me, I'll do it. But I have my own concerns about that kind, I'll call it, ascension to political power. But at the same time, the alternative here is the kind of fascist political power that is personified by the Trump movement.